So if there's something specific that you want to gain from this video, then by all means skip ahead. But to kick it off, the best illustration, I believe, of top speed is to look at an actual race and how things play out. And so let's say speed's here, distance is here. Obviously, we're going to start at 0 at the start of a race. But let's look at a few different hypothetical athletes, and let's say that they're all going to hit, say, 9.5 meters per second at top speed. And so given the difficulty in holding top speed, let's say that the first athlete gets to top speed, and then they do a pretty good job at maintaining it. So they only drop off a little bit. We've got that scenario. Then let's say we have another athlete. They come through, and it's the same kind of idea. They hit top speed here. Let's say it's the same thing here. But let's say that they really drop off. And so they end up dropping off a little bit more. So it looks more like that. Now, two different ways to look at this is, all right, so we've got one athlete here in the blue. They work a lot on maintaining speed. So they hit that 9.5. Their top speed, and this is just the same for everyone, top speed is incredibly difficult to hold. And so it's very unlikely to go more than 20 meters of holding top speed, especially the more elite you are, the higher that top speed is in the first place. And so the blue scenario here where we say, let's say you drop like only 0.1, so you go from 9.5, you only drop down to like 9.3, 9.4, that would be very good maintenance of speed. And so we've got that athlete there. And so let's say that the athlete here that is dropping off to say more like 0.3 to 0.4, they're losing quite a bit. Let's say that they increase their top speed now. And so the ceiling's now being increased, and this athlete is now hitting 10 meters per second. All right, so we've done a lot of top speed work. Now we're at 10 meters per second. This athlete can go the same curve, but now they go up to here. And let's say they still drop a lot of speed. So we're still dropping off 0.3, which would be a lot. Typically a little bit more than what you would usually see. Now, the key thing here is that in comparing them, so say they've taken 9.5 to 10 meters per second, they've taken their top speed up. They're still doing a really poor job at holding top speed. But here's the key. If we lose a lot of top speed, so let's say they lost 0.3, which is a lot, they're still moving at, let's actually there. So they're still moving at a higher pace than what it was before. So if the top speed here is 9.5 and they lost a lot, they're coming down to like a 9.1 and 9.2. Even if they do a terrible job at holding it, they're still moving at a higher speed here. In fact, we take the athlete in the first example that does a lot of work on holding speed and they do a good job of it. This person that's really dying at the end of the race is still considerably higher. And that's really what represents the true value in doing top speed. And so the way I look at it is if we're really trying to get ourselves to a point where, let's say we're taking a 100-meter sprinter, and then let's say your top speed is around 10 meters per second, and you're moving somewhere in like the mid-11s. To take yourself from being a mid-11-second sprinter to into, let's say, a 10.5-second sprinter, it's really, obviously, it's going to be about top speed. And so the priority in terms of getting this done as quick as possible is really on taking this more up to like 11 meters per second. And so, like, my thing is, if you're hitting 9.5 or let's say even 10 meters per second, why would you worry about holding a top speed here, like learning the skill of holding a top speed there? And let's say best case scenario, you hold it for like 20 meters, which is very difficult to do. As soon as you go and raise that up to the 11 meters per second required to then run at, say, more like a 10.5, then we've got a new issue, although a good problem, but the new problem of having to now maintain this speed that is considerably higher than this. And so this is kind of my big issue in the short term. We're doing a lot of speed endurance. Why work on speed endurance when we need more top speed? If you've got good top speed, then absolutely, let's work on speed endurance. Or if we're peaking for, say, a national competition or the biggest competition of the year, then absolutely you can start to consider bringing that in. But outside of that scenario, this is really the key. And this is why I say top speed is the absolute most important factor for anyone that races in the 60, the 100, the 200, or even the 400. And so again, that's kind of what I think is a great way to summarize the value in top speed. And so if I bring up, let's look at, move on to number 2, so Olympic final. So if I pull up the splits here, so we've got Noah Lyles, he wins with a 9.79, and he has a point where he's reaching top speed approximately 60 meters in. And then we've got a split time of 0.82. And so he does a really good job at holding top speed as far as the splits go. But let me just say, he gets to his top speed, say, if this is our 100 meter, if this is our 100 here, and this is the 60 mark, I mean, he's hitting top speed around here. And he's only, like, I mean, we've got a 0.82 from 60 to 70. Right before that, we've got a 0.83. And then right after, we've got a 0.83 into a 0.84. And so top speed, I mean, the best 10-meter split has been maintained through that one section for 10 meters, and then it's already going down. And so immediately it's going down, and then he's working on holding it. And so my point there is that he won the gold, and so he had the fastest time, and he's only holding top speed for 10 meters. And then, I mean, if we look at Thompson with the second place, we had 0.83 that he held that for 20 meters. So again, probably on the higher end. I think the only one, and Simbini, he had the fastest 10-meter split that I could see in this one at 0.81. He had a 0.86 before and a 0.84 after. And so if the 0.81 is legit, it's, again, only held for 10 meters. And so the longest one I think we saw was Tobago with a 0.84 maintained for 30. But I'd argue, given the point at where he hits top speed in that race, I think beyond the 70, if I remember right, I'd argue that he was pushing like a 95%, so almost not going at max to be able to sustain it for a bit longer. But let's just say, hypothetically, that was his absolute max. He held it for 30 meters, which is pretty incredible. And as far as what I've seen as far as 10-meter splits go with world-class athletes, is you're really never going to see anything beyond their fastest 10-meter split maintained for longer than 30 meters, and certainly not if they're really pushing to 100% from there. So, again, driving home that point that it's almost, I'm basically saying we would rather settle for this model where we push top speed up more and accept a bigger drop as opposed to working on maintaining something from here. And again, like, let's say that you have a set target or requirement for you to make a certain team, a national team, or whatever it is from there. If you have that determined in top speed, then for sure you can get to this spot and then work on holding it from there. So Olympic final, illustrating that the difficulty, basically I chuck that in there just to illustrate the point that it's incredibly difficult to hold top speed. And so if the best athletes in the world as of last year were holding it for 10 to 20 meters, the guys that placed first and second, that's really saying something in terms of how much it's going to make a difference to go top speed over speed endurance as far as that conversation goes. All right, so that brings me down to 400 meter sprinter. So if we have the 400, then realistically, if your cap is 10 in the 400 meter, your body's never going to hit that. So we're going to be under here. And so let's just say for a nice even score, let's say that you're trying to get as close as you can to 80% in the race. Again, if you are here with the blue line and you're moving at 9.5, then your 80% mark is going to be more like here. If you raise it up, your 80% mark is going to be more like here. So it's still the same scenario. And again, we can just kind of stretch this out over the 400. Like if we raise your top speed a lot, and even if you're dropping a lot, I mean, if we put half a meter per second on your top speed and you're losing a lot, chances are you're still moving at a higher point, even with a drop off from here to here. So maintaining it. So again, even with 400 meter sprinting, and so that's why I'd say top speed, single most important factor for anyone running under 400 meters. Again, that's why I would put it there. So no doubt there's value in 400 meter athletes training like sprinters, just in terms of developing the top speed. Obviously the block starts, etc. It's not anywhere near as important as, for example, a 60 meter sprinter. And then just while on that topic, the value in what about a 100 meter sprinter training like a 400 meter sprinter? So obviously working on longer distances, working on, let's say, speed endurance and that aerobic development. I would again just argue that fact that, like, let's say if this is really where we need to be operating and we're operating here, again, why would we work on trying to maintain this when, let's say, best scenario is we can hold it for 20 to 30 meters? That's best case scenario. why would we settle for that when there's such a big gap? Like, this is the necessary gap to bridge that gap in terms of where we want to be performing at. And so if that is a priority, why would you switch it up? And so as far as value in training like a 400-meter sprinter, doing longer work, I think the common arguments comes down to we've got work capacity and we've got like aerobic development, which would, if we're not talking about work capacity, then we're talking about the recovery benefits. I don't know if that's still in the frame or if that writing is even readable, but let's just say work capacity and aerobic system development or cardiovascular side of things benefiting from there. What I would say as well is if we are training, let's say that we're developing top speed and we're working on fly 10s. All right, so we're working on fly 10s to 30s. If that's what we are doing as a sprinter, let's say 60 or 100 meter sprinter, if that's what we're working on, doing that actual work will develop your work capacity to handle more of this work. And so if I'm doing 120s, the 200 meter sprints or whatever, I'm never actually touching top speed, but I'm just running at high efforts for longer periods, I will develop my ability to handle more training, but not necessarily my ability to handle more of this. But let's say, like, even if it did increase your capacity to handle more top speed work, it wouldn't increase your work capacity to handle more top speed work than literally just doing top speed work. And so that argument for me just doesn't make any sense. And then as far as the cardiovascular development, that side of things would make sense as far as improving your recovery capacity. But again, we still develop your cardiovascular system doing sprint training, even if it's to a lesser extent. And so it's still developing that ability. And I'd circle back to like, would be true, but what other options do we have? What alternatives do we have? And I would certainly prefer a circumstance where I work on literally developing top speed, the most important thing, and then find other means of developing my recovery capacity, given that there's an extensive amount of options right there. And so should a 100-meter sprinter train like a 400-meter sprinter? I literally don't think there's any scenario that would justify that. And I would extend that to 200-meter sprinters. I would still train for top speed. I wouldn't really deviate to training like a 400-meter sprinter. In fact, the only thing I'm really driving home here is that a 400-meter sprinter should probably train more like a 100-meter sprinter, just in terms of developing top speed. All right, so if we go to actually developing top speed, I think if we're going to break it down as the most important factors that you need is, number one, it has to be feedback. And what I mean by this is you must time. And so, like, if I'm doing any sort of sprint training, and even if it's a fly 10 to a 30, if I'm doing any sort of work where I'm touching top speed, if I'm not getting feedback of my time, then I'm working on something different. So if I've got a coach there and I'm running and there's no time, then we're working on like a technical execution. And technical execution, while super important, is not necessarily going to reward me in more top speed. And so something that I've seen very common is that if I have someone that's come from a background where they've done a lot of coaching feedback, they have things looking really nice in terms of their efforts, if I time them and you can kind of see them almost ticking over that rep in their head, trying to execute things right, if we just throw that all out the window, let it get a little ugly, and just push as hard as we can for a top speed, almost every single time I see a better time. And so I see top speed come up. And then this is the beginning, in my opinion, of when we actually work on top speed. So we're actually pushing for top speed, seeing the feedback, and then trying again and subconsciously figuring things out, as well as the fact that we're actually pushing top speed. We're actually touching top speed, getting that stimulus into the body, and then being able to adapt from there. So absolutely, the most critical thing is if we're going to train top speed, we need timing feedback. And so this is where I drive on the stopwatch solution. And so honestly, the stopwatch solution is just to put the stopwatch in the bin. Like, when we're talking about top speed, like I just brought up the Olympic times before, and we had a range of 0.81 to like 0.84, I think, just as far as athletes that I brought up before. And that's over 10 meters. Obviously, these are the best athletes in the world. So let's just say an average sprinter, you might do like even just say 1 second over that. And then a better sprinter, obviously you're making your way towards this metric right here. And so let's bring in the stopwatch from there. Like the amount of things that can go wrong in terms of the person holding the stopwatch. Like, and again, we're looking at the hundredths of a second right here. Like there's just far too much room for human error as far as when it clicks the first time and then when it clicks to finish. And then you also got a question as well, like as a coach, when I'm coaching someone to run faster, like I'm hoping that they run faster in that rep, they have a successful rep. And so that's a coach's bias. I'm there with a stopwatch and I want to click it when it's a little bit earlier. Like I want to see those times improve. That's just on a subconscious level. So I can tell myself I'm going to try and click it when they get to this point and this point. But again, if you're really motivated as a coach to get that athlete better, chances are you're going to click it a little bit more on the earlier sides from there. Then again, we got the person as well holding the stopwatch to say that's me as well. If I had a really heavy session the day before or a stressful day or whatever it is, there's a various amounts of fatigue in my body, and then fatigue in itself is going to play a role in my reaction time to click this. The list literally just goes on. It's so ridiculously inaccurate as far as being able to get this, that it just provides a feedback solution or feedback system with a stopwatch that's just not accurate. And again, like if we've got, I'll check it actually. If you put into ChatGPT how much room for error is there with a stopwatch timing, what we've got with a quick table reference is it's saying if you have someone running 1 second, there is a range where you could possibly get typically a 0.9 or a 1.1. And so we've got around a range of 0.2 seconds off. And so, I mean, like if we're talking about, let's say that you're an athlete and you were at 0.84 and you actually ran a 0.81, like a ridiculous increase in performance. I mean, imagine if you had someone like that and then you get a score that's like 0.94. And so you're thinking when you did that rep, I believe that I ran faster, and then the stopwatch comes back and tells you that you ran slower. That's the information that you're processing in terms of learning how to run faster. And that information is incredibly flawed. And so it's just an absolute no if it comes to how do I train top speed, how do I run faster. Stopwatch is just not a solution. So anyone that tells me they're using a stopwatch for it, it's just an if you're serious about sprinting, it's an unacceptable standard to hold yourself to. And so we absolutely must look into other means and say the cheapest, like good value timing system is you get a free lap, and then you look at things from there. And so absolutely you must time to learn how to run faster. If you're not timing your reps, you're just training the skill. And again, if you do time with a skill, I mean, the best thing is you would drive it in. So we have that skill. The technique is obviously part of it. And so if we work on technique while using feedback, then we can, for one, see whether any technical changes actually reward you in an improved performance. Otherwise, we can obviously neglect the need to keep those in there. And again, fortunately or unfortunately, the technique is influenced by the coach or yourself if you're coaching yourself. And so this is flawed by your coach's view. And so they watch you run, or ideally if they film you run and watch you run, then they're just going by what they see. So that depends on pre-existing models that they've learned, pre-existing models that they've seen produce success or assumed produce success, but hopefully actually did produce success. And that's what they're looking for. And in terms of they're trying to fit you into that model. And I'm talking about myself as well. So I've seen someone run. As far as technically, I'll look at what I believe would be the next piece to bring them to the next level. But again, this is still a system that comes down to this. And so if there's none of this circling back to see if it actually works, then we have a very sketchy system, because if this coach really believes in a model that's not actually working for this athlete, and you keep going down a different direction from there, then we can really see what I'd seen before is when you have an athlete comes in, they look pretty when they run, but the time is slow. And so we absolutely don't want that. And so, of course, we want technical progressions, but not at the cost of running slower. And so I'll put technique here. I believe the best way to develop technique for top speed is to do drills that have certain constraints built in. So whether it's a task or say like something that everyone knows is like wickets. if you're running over wickets, you have to adjust how you're moving your body. And so if you did timed wickets, that would be an example of getting feedback for a technical solution that you want. If you're doing wickets without timing feedback, then we have no means of knowing whether this is actually working for you and helping or just transferring these changes at all. And so absolutely technique, but we want some sort of constraint to get the technical thing that we want. And then we want to circle back and always test that that's actually helping performance in terms of increasing top speed. All right, the third thing, so strongest tools to develop top speed. We've got assisted speed. And so fortunately for myself, I've got a 1080, so I'll use the 1080 to do assisted sprints. But what I want to note here is that this is just a means of overspeed. And so we can create the assisted environment, I should say overspeed environment, in more ways than just literally getting pulled. And so, for example, single leg runs, we can load one side of the body, different examples like that. And so if I do a single leg run, so I'm emphasizing one leg, if the leg that I'm not emphasizing isn't giving me as much stride length and as much time off the floor, then it's going to create an overspeed action on the side that I am emphasizing. And then we get an overspeed action. The reason why I believe that works well is because it shifts our technique favorably for a way that comes back and improves top speed. Loading one side of the body, let's say we do fly 10s, we've got like a micro weight on one side of the body. The side that is unloaded would need to be increased in terms of the frequency to be able to compensate for this load being on one side of the body. So a bit of an unorthodox method, but again, we can drive that back with the feedback to make sure we're competing to actually push a higher speed, and then see if we get a technical change that is circling back again to producing a better means here. So number one, the king, feedback. You have to use a legit timing system. Again, we want to try and get technical changes. Again, ideally, the best means here is to circle it back to drills that we can put a time on and then see whether it actually works. Otherwise, outside of that, I'll use it for warm-ups. So to prep your body, it's a great opportunity to work on technical changes. And then anything over speed is very good as far as a tool to develop top speed from there.